Okay, so we're going to start off talking about water resources, and I'll try to adjust the box here so we get it covered on the screen, I think. Do this. It should expand. Why is that not expanding? All right, well, we'll have to live with it. So we're starting off with talking about California water resources. Again, what I've done here is included the kind of summary that's within the study guide. So this first slide is the summary that you have within the study guide. We didn't talk a whole lot about sort of the hydrologic cycle and the mechanics of the hydrologic cycle, so you don't have to worry too much about that. This first one is important, the natural distribution and variability of water resources, especially the spatial and temporal variability, and we'll talk about this. Watersheds, the importance of watersheds, stream flow, then discharge, that's how we measure stream flow. The developed water was obviously an important part of what we discussed. We did introduce these different types of wetlands. Water users, I'll just mention that, those are in order with agriculture comprising about 75%, about 3/4 of all the developed water goes to agriculture in California. These water rights laws, those are actually shown in order of their when they were relevant to California, when they kicked in anyways. Didn't spend a huge amount of time on those, so you should be familiar with them for the multiple choice, maybe for a fill-in question. The two big water projects, the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project, the importance of the Delta, the transformation of the San Joaquin and Sacramento River watersheds, obviously this massive system of water development was sort of focused around these two great watersheds. So that's kind of what we're looking at there, this idea of the actual facilities of the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project, maybe just a sampling of a dam or two that relates to each of these projects. Some of the proposed solutions to dealing with water shortages, and you should be aware of the different environmental concerns that have cropped up with respect to California water resources. When we talk about spatial and temporal variability, space is geographic space, temporal is time, right? So obviously the purple areas are representing the highest rainfall areas. That's where the most amount of natural water flow occurs. So obviously there's tremendous spatial variability between the northwestern part of California and the southeastern part of California, being the lowest rainfall in California. You'll notice the correlation to the mountain areas. Temporal variability, summer, we have dry summers, right? So if you're going to irrigate, you're going to do anything during the summer, you're going to have to deal with the fact that California doesn't get rainfall during the summer. That is the primary reason for the big system of dams and aqueducts that we have, because we don't get summer rainfall. But we also have drought cycles, El Nino cycles, other things that cause variability of natural rainfall. I have a statement of the obvious here, and the reason that California has been called the largest plumbing system on Earth, although the Chinese are probably rivaling this now with some of their projects. Again, it's common, especially in the North State, for people to say, we don't want to give our water to Los Angeles. To a degree, the argument has validity. We're certainly sending a lot of water south per capita. On a person basis, people in LA are using a lot less water than people in the North State on a per-person basis. But with a population of 17 million people, there's obviously a huge water demand. The other thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about that argument is remember that this, LA and San Francisco, the urban areas, are what makes California one of the 6th largest economies in the world. And we're getting lots and lots of tax benefits from that. Okay, if we did not have LA and San Francisco, we would be Mississippi. And I challenge you to drive through Mississippi and look at the state of their infrastructure, because they don't have a tax base. They can't pay for anything. Farms, obviously, using 3 out of every 4 gallons of water going to agriculture is really putting the screws on agriculture to try to come up with more efficient methods for farming. Watersheds, really important. We're looking down on the Sacramento River, and of course, how you manage these lands, the forests, is going to affect water quality. And if this is an urban or a paved watershed and there's oil runoff and other things, that's going to go in the water and it's going to create problems. If people are, if erosion is happening upslope, it's going into the streams and it's going to affect fish. Okay, so these areas are what catch, store, and release water. So this is why there's so much money and energy and coordination going into these areas, into watersheds, that is. Watershed groups all over California. There's about 10 of them in the North State. Okay, so water development for human use. Again, this is kind of the green outer area represents the drainage area of the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers combined, the delta, and we looked at some of these examples of what these areas used to look like. If you look at wetlands, for example, you've got maybe 15% of the natural native wetlands along the riparian corridor, right? The riparian forests are going to be along the rivers. If you're around San Francisco Bay, there's salt marshes. If you're up in the mountains, there are mountain meadows. These are hugely important for wildlife, but they're also really important for water quality. So a lot of the energy now is about trying to sort of restore these areas. But the fact that we have built so many dams, that have basically come in, and this is just the whole drainage basin, but dams that are, all up and down the west side of the Sierra Nevada range has really altered this system, and we're seeing some of the effects, especially with fish. Okay, so, supply and demand, water quality, adapting to California's water variability, and then some of the sort of sacrifices that we're looking at. Groundwater, big growing concern. During the drought, we really relied on groundwater, and now we're seeing groundwater tables dropping. Groundwater pollution is a big problem, and the state is grappling with how to better manage that really important water resource. Student just wrote a paper for me in my other class, and he gave the statistic of worldwide something like a third or a quarter of water used was groundwater. It's really pretty impressive when you think about it. So the Delta stores water for 22 million people in Southern California and the multi-billion-dollar agricultural industry in the San Joaquin Valley. You should have an idea of where the delta is located. It's a natural inland delta, but one that has been modified in part to accommodate our water needs. And why is this and this is actually a mistake I've seen students make. The delta is not the source of where the water is coming from. The delta is the place that we're storing the water as it comes down from Shasta Dam or down from Lake Oroville or other places. Okay, and it's a holding area, and then we route it south. But with instability of levees, prone to earthquake, land subsidence, rising sea levels, saltwater intrusion, and then the challenges around species like the Delta smelt is part of the reason that we're concerned here. Okay, the Delta smelt, kind of a signature species of concern listed on the Endangered Species Act. Some water quality issues. DDT is something that has been an issue was an issue back in the 60s and early 70s. They outlawed it. and we saw hawks and eagles, pelicans return after this. But there are other issues with water quality that are still a significant concern. Invasive species, among the other problems that are facing the challenges with water resources. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about cultural geography. Again, this is kind of the outline. Cultural landscapes, cultural expressions, population density and distribution, demographic equation, native period, representative tribes. We talked a little bit about these. You saw these, so we'll kind of launch right into things here. So definition here, right? So this is something you might see as a fill in the term kind of thing, right? Where I would give you maybe the definition of a ethnic group. You would have to identify that, or it might be a multiple choice question. Okay, so when we talk about, I asked this question, or I posed this question in the discussion questions about the nature of these different groups in terms of their distribution, in terms of their economy, in terms of how they use the land. And Aboriginal peoples in California are organized into tribelets. Remember that only in the desert Southwest do you have agriculture being practiced. So by and large, these are hunter-gatherers. Again, why hunter-gatherers? Well, in part, California was so productive that you didn't need to have the agriculture. There were also other sort of proximity reasons that it didn't develop. But seasonal migration and trade among small tribes was part of the makeup of Aboriginal California, and the use of fire as a land management tool. This idea that native peoples didn't alter the landscape is completely bogus, right? They most definitely did, and for thousands of years before the arrival of Europeans into California. Of course, that originates with Cabrillo. A couple people asked me about dates. I'm not a stickler on dates, but you should have general sequence, ballpark within, a few decades or so of when these things took place. Okay, settled on the coast from San Diego to San Francisco. Missions, which are the religious institutions. Again, the larger text indicating this was the principal mechanism. You should know the general distribution of the missions, right? This idea that they were coastal south of San Francisco. Okay, so during the Spanish era, for example, you would have had very little imprint that wasn't the native peoples in this part of the state. I mean, there was some fur traders and things that started to come up here, but this tallow trade, hide and tallow trade with Asia was kind of the economic foundation. Of course, they employed, that's a nice euphemistic term for, essentially enslaving the native peoples to work these mission gardens and cattle operations. In 1822, you have Mexican independence. We continue with the livestock and grain production on ranchos and expand private ownership under the land grants. This does extend up into Redding. So we have a historic land grant in Redding. Okay, the Bear Flag Revolt in 1846, and then statehood in 1850. The Gold Rush period, this tremendous increase in population with this sort of myopic. This is where you really see this very individualistic kind of attitude coming in during this period, with San Francisco and Sacramento as key cities. And remember that while gold was the impetus for people coming in, this is where you see the California start to grow through these different towns and so forth. Okay, so that's going to be the end of this recording because my time runs out.